He is my friend from Fox Sports and The Athletic, covering college action, college football, and its season coming up. He is our friend Bruce Feldman. How are you, Bruce?
I'm doing well, Rich. Good to be on with you.
Good to be on with you too, sir. So I give you the floor on what is going on in the college football world right now that everybody is talking about. I imagine it's the possibility of not having a season. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I think it depends who you talk to and what parts of the country you talk to people, depending on how hard the coronavirus has really hit their area. From a lot of people I've talked to, especially, around FCC country, I think they're very optimistic that there will be a season and it can start on time. I think when you talk to some people maybe in the Midwest and certainly on the West Coast, I think they're probably a little more, maybe, I don't know if skeptical is probably too strong of a word, but I think they're more of the, let's see where we are a month from now, 2 months from now. I think they're probably a little more guarded with it. But I think also, you got to keep in mind, like a month from now is still a while away. I mean, so I think people are waiting to see, okay, is this going to ease up as the country starts to open up more and go, I don't want to say go back to normal, but starts to go back out? Are we going to have another outbreak? Are the numbers going to go up significantly? Are the numbers going to go up, depending on how much more widespread the testing is? I think that's one of the things that a lot of people on the education side of this are waiting to see, especially is what's going to happen with the testing. Because in order to have games, I think we have to have a lot more rigid testing in place. From the people I've talked to, think that needs to happen. Whether it's fans in the stands or not, I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty. And I've seen a couple of my colleagues bring this up, and I think it's true. Sometimes the answer of "I don't know" is probably the most valid one, because right now I think there's a lot of people, especially if you're on the coaching side, you're like, all right, we're going to prepare mentally and get things in place as best we can as if the season's going to start on time, because it's easier to reevaluate from that standpoint than it is to act like, hey, we're just gonna kick the can down the road and hope something better comes along at the start of 2021.
Well, what about the idea, Bruce, that that there's got to be kids on college campuses in order to have a football season? And we've heard some college commissioners of conferences say this is a student-athlete sport. Scoff all you want, but if there are no kids on campuses and there's remote learning, we're not having a season. Is that still the operative sense? Or there could be fractioning, saying certain teams in the Big 12 don't want to do it? That's fine. We can have a Big 7 or a Big 6 for the year. Walk me through that right now.
Yeah, I think that issue becomes kind of a moving target, and it changes for people. I don't say by the day, but I think that people fluctuate on it, and the leaders of the sport. Remember, this is already a fractured sport in college football in terms of more than probably any other that's in the mainstream, because there is no commissioner. There is a group of conference commissioners. But I'll give you this scenario, which is, let's say that the numbers are not as devastating in the SEC footprint. And look, Louisiana's gotten hit very hard by it, especially New Orleans. But let's say that a month from now, the numbers are not as devastating as they are maybe in some parts of the Midwest and certainly the Northeast. Then does the SEC say, look, we're going to sit this out just like everybody else is intending to, even though we feel like we have, I don't want to say that they have this handled, because that's probably not the right way to frame it. But even if they're looking at it and say, you know what, we think this is something that can be managed, and if we take as much precautions as we can, because the ramifications of not having a college football season is financially devastating to colleges and definitely college athletics. So rather, if we feel like we're in a position where we can have a season, even if it's just a conference season, even if it's 8 games and not a full 12-game schedule, even if there isn't some version of a bowl structure in place, I think it'd be hard for them from that standpoint to go, yeah, we're going to sit this out just like everybody else in unison, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars. And when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars and the financial potential that it has to wreck many of these colleges, they're not just their athletic programs, but also the businesses around these colleges. I think this is not an easy decision for people to make. And I think one thing, just from taking a step back on it, I think the thing that a lot of us, whether we're in the media, whether we're in the middle of the sport, whether we're fans, whoever, I don't think it's necessarily just a black and white thing where you can say, you know what, they're thinking of having a season. That means they don't believe in science or they don't believe in X, Y, or Z. Or if they think that it's right now, the situation is cataclysmic, that, okay, this is people who don't consider the other things. I think for most people, it's not so black and white. I think there are really levels to this, and that's why I think it's so complicated for a lot of people to track as this thing is moving.
Absolutely. I guess we'll know if Hugh Freeze is Coach of the Year, then Liberty's the only team that was playing this fall against each other. And then when it all comes down to it, though, Bruce, what do you think the eventuality of this is? You were going to talk about revenues. Then certain schools that have the cash that could do it, certain schools that need the cash must do it. You kind of came up with the idea of this will be science-based. We're not seeing that a lot in society today. So my question for you on that front is it possible that we end up seeing, the haves play football and the have-nots not? Is that a possibility this fall?
I think it's possible. I think what you got to keep in mind is, as things start to open back up, we're not talking about are we going to see dramatic spikes, a day later? I think it's something that people are going to have to monitor. And I also think, towards the bigger issue of this, I think for decision makers and for a lot of people, though, I think the numbers, as devastating as they are, and what are we at, 80,000 deaths in the country at this point, or almost that, I think the thing that it becomes even more real to them, if the numbers don't, when it hits somebody very close to them. And it's that thing that changes it. I think that for a lot of people who watch this, they're like, they saw Rudy Gobert and they saw Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson, and they've seen people who they know of, but then they've seen them either, recover from it or whatnot. I think if they started to see people on the teams they root for really, struggling with this, I think that would change for a lot of people. Again, I think what we're talking about is different than opening up some businesses as opposed to having football, which is a sport which is every day of the week you are around 100, 150 other guys. And the potential for this isn't as much as Mike Gundy went on, had his comments a month or so ago about 18 to 22-year-olds. It's not just 18 to 22-year-olds. There's guys on most coaching staffs who are 50, 60 years old. I don't know, there's probably a handful of them also who have some pre-existing conditions. I think it's complicated. And again, I think that as they try to monitor what they can manage and what they feel is something that they can kind of deal with, both mentally as well as from the science aspect of it. I think this is such a moving target for a lot of people. When we talk about science, people are like, well, this model was wrong and that model was wrong. It's not like talking about the weather forecast, right? So there's so many variables that go into it, including some human variables that go into it. And I think that, as the leadership, in quotes, around college football tries to chart this, I think it's, you're going to see, a university president, you may see AD, conference commissioners, make a statement on a Tuesday, and then it could be invalidated, or maybe it'll be parsed in the wrong way, because we've seen a lot of that. And I just think that right now we're in this weird echo chamber as people try to make sense of it. And right now, I don't think anybody's going to have, they could say we're definitely going to we feel confident we're going to play a season, and it could all change, 3 weeks from now. Just like I think if somebody says, hey, we're not going to, it doesn't look very good. Well, who knows? Maybe things will change. It's like I said, it's not like just a weather forecast. I think there's so many variables that go into this that leave it really up in the air, probably more up in the air than most people are used to thinking. And it's just like, you know what? Let's see where it goes.
Peter King of NBC Sports and Football Morning in America spoke to Dr. Anthony Fauci about the NFL season's possibility, and we'll have Peter on in about a half an hour from now, a little bit more with Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports and also The Athletic here on the Rich Eisen Show. What did my coach do on Friday that people might have missed because lots was going on? UFC was coming back, and the weekend was upon us, and he sent out a letter to the football community. I'll give you the floor on that, Bruce, and the ripple in the pond after that.
Well, I think he's trying to think big picture, at least in terms of he's talked a lot about some other issues, whether it's when kids can transfer, but also I think in this time it was like basically who could be cleared and when to leave early for the NFL, as opposed to sitting out, having to wait 3 years from when your high school class graduated.
Right, and I do want to jump in here for those who may not know. We're referring to Jim Harbaugh of Michigan when I say my coach. So I don't want to assume everybody knew what I was talking about. So I'll give you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to get in there.
Yeah, I think that, look, it's an interesting idea. I think there's a lot of things that are probably more complex than they get. The one-time transfer exemption is an example of how this is more complicated. And when it relates to the scholarships and everything else involved, right now the NCAA, and it's been this way for a while, has been operating under a 25 cap limit of scholarships you get a year. So even if your program is not at 85, that's not that relevant to how this works. Let's say your program, you lost a bunch of kids early who decided to leave, and they became 7th-round picks or 6th-round picks or whatever, first-round picks, and you're down to 67 scholarships. You don't just get to get back up to 85. You only get 25, and that is the thing more than any other that I think is, driving what a lot of coaches, maybe not Jim Harbaugh, are concerned about, because you cannot replace the ones. And I think how that relates, and people can say, okay, that's just coaches feeling like they're protecting their own self-interest. While that is true, you also got to keep in mind there are not going to be places for kids who transfer to land, because if there's not a couple of vacancies left in the 25 spots, and a lot of schools rarely have more than like one or two after signing day happens, there's no scholarships for them to go to. And so what happens, and it's happened a lot with the portal already, is players end up thinking, oh, well, this school offered me out of high school. Yeah, but that was out of high school. They filled those spots probably. They may not have room for you. And so a lot of times kids announce they're leaving. They essentially give up their scholarships, and they end up with nowhere. I did a big story on The Athletic last week about this very thing. And, it is a fraction of people in Power 5. It might be like the ACC. I think there was over 100 kids who left, and about 10% of them actually got FBS scholarships after they left. It just so I think in theory, and this goes to also Jim's open letter, I think it's one thing just to put that out there as a billboard, and it's obviously Jim Harbaugh is going to get a lot of attention. I'm sure there's plenty of Ohio State fans who are going, yeah, he wants all our great players to leave because we have the kind of kids who can leave, earlier than, his kids. I think that's all well and good of a rivalry, but I think the practical piece of it about, there needs to be other, if you're going to do that, they need to figure out some other legislation to have offset. So it's not like there's a road to nowhere for people who are leaving and there's no scholarship opportunity for them to get.
Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports and The Athletic, in your latest piece, kind of bring it all together, this whole what's old is new again world, and trying to use it as a prism for the current sports scene, like The Last Dance in a way. You spoke to Reggie Bush about the name, image, and likeness new world that's coming to college football. What did Reggie have to say?
Reggie's perspective was fascinating. We talked for about a week back and forth about this subject. And he's of the mind, and obviously he got into a lot of hot water with the NCAA. His alma mater got devastating sanctions, lost 30 scholarships, 2-year bowl ban. And really, Reggie Bush could have made so much more, probably, according to the experts I talked to for the story, who projected what Reggie Bush could have made if he played now, which is 10 times what anybody else, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, any other star would have made this past year under this rule. And even if you use Reggie Bush's actual time frame, which was 2004, 2005, he still would have made, they projected, $2 to $3 million a year based on his earning potential, which would be, 10 times what the NCAA was alleging that he and his family would have gotten or were to have gotten in benefits. And so when he looks at this, he told me, he was like, look, I made some mistakes through this. I'm not going to say I didn't. And there was things he regretted about it. But he said, if my situation had to happen for people to look back and say, all right, this is a wrong system. Because remember, the money that people were making, again, off of college athletes, when it comes to the high end of the food chain, it's pretty staggering. And so we were talking about somebody who could have made $2 to $3 million, and this is even before social media. It's pretty eye-opening, and I think he said a lot of times in this country we are very reactive. We're not proactive, and he said sometimes people look back and go, wait a minute, what were we thinking? Why was this the rule?
Right.
And he was like, the NCAA has fought this at every turn, and he's happy that for now, he said, I'm glad that thousands of kids will end up benefiting from this, even though obviously it was a real mess for him and his family, and certainly for USC in the wake of it.
It started over video games, didn't it? Back in the day?
This one, no. I think this whole thing gets really complicated, and it goes down a slippery slope in a hurry. And I think, to tie back to all the other NIL stuff, they're worried about third-party people. You're worried about transfer third-party people. There's just, it's all kind of connected. And the reason why this, and this is a little bit mentioned in the story, the reason why this NIL stuff is so hard for the NCAA is because, let's say, you're a prominent alum of your school. You want to have your star quarterback come to your son's birthday party. You could do it for $50,000. You could do it for $100,000. Normally, it wouldn't matter, but because there's a recruiting component tied to college athletics,
right,
that's where the NCAA is trying to police it, and that's what's going to come into the crosshairs of Congress, who are going to say, wait a minute, that's not free market value if you're capping it and you're limiting it. So it's going to get very messy as the NCAA tries to sort this out going forward. And the Reggie Bush story is a real good example of how it can get really messy.
Well, I guess the video game stuff I meant is that's how the name and image and likeness stuff got started, with the O'Bannons, et cetera, in college basketball. But I guess what to just put a button on this whole conversation here is that we have no idea what college sports is going to look like post COVID-19. We have no idea how many programs are still going to be existing depending on how long this goes, and if fall sports does in fact exist, and we may see a separation between Power 5 conferences and the rest of and the rest of college athletics, and the potential, parting of the ways where Power 5 starts their own stuff outside of the NCAA. Things I'm reading and hearing so much stuff based on what might happen in the next 6, 8, 12 months. It's crazy. We have no idea what the world is going to look like, Bruce.
we don't. And I think the thing that just, people probably need to keep in mind here is we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars as it relates to it. And there are not easy answers to this. And I think as people get really further down the road on what's happening with the virus, as we get closer to the college football season, I just think that, you got to keep in mind that there is really fractured leadership here. And that's kind of a recipe for a lot of the things you just outlined potentially happening. I mean, the margins are very slim for some of these programs who are not Alabama or LSU or Michigan or Ohio State. It's just a very different world they live in.
Bruce, you're the man. Hope everybody's happy and healthy and safe in your world.
Same to you, Rich.
Right
I appreciate the time. It's always good talking to you.
Always, Bruce. That's Bruce Feldman. Check out his new piece. He spoke to Reggie Bush. It's a great read on The Athletic. And then, obviously, he'll be back on the sidelines if there is a sidelines to get back on this fall on Fox Sports. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.